The autumn of 1876 brought more than just a change of leaves to the dusty town of Silverwood, Colorado. It brought Cassandra Baxter to her knees, clutching her father's final letter with trembling hands. The banker's notice of foreclosure lay beside it on the weathered kitchen table, its formal language spelling out the end of everything she had ever known. "You have 1 month to vacate the premises," the banker had told her that morning, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held when her father was alive. "Unless, of course, you can produce $500. $500 might as well have been $5 million. Her father's medical bills had drained what little savings they'd had. The drought had withered their crops to nothing. And now pneumonia had taken Thomas Baxter himself, leaving his 22-year-old daughter alone with a mountain of debt and nowhere to turn. Cassandra wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. She couldn't afford to indulge in grief. Not now. She needed solutions, not sorrow. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not so soon after the funeral. When she opened the door, she found Sheriff Wilson standing on her porch, hat in hand. His weathered face was grim beneath his gray mustache. "Miss Baxter," he said with a nod. "May I come in? There's something I need to discuss with you." Cassandra stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Of course, Sheriff. Though I'm afraid I don't have much to offer in the way of hospitality." The sheriff settled his bulky frame into one of the kitchen chairs. "No matter, Miss Baxter. What I've come to discuss is rather delicate." A fresh wave of anxiety washed over her. "Is it about the farm?" "I've already received notice from the bank." "Partly," Sheriff Wilson admitted. "I've known your family since before you were born, Cassandra. Your father was a good man. It pains me to see you in such straits." "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I doubt you came all this way just to offer condolences." The sheriff cleared his throat. "No, I didn't. I've come with a proposition. One that might solve your financial troubles." Cassandra leaned forward. "I'm listening." "There's a rancher, Matthew Vance, owner of the Big V Ranch north of town. He's looking for a wife." She blinked. "And what does that have to do with me?" The sheriff's expression grew uncomfortable. "He's willing to pay off your debts in exchange for your hand in marriage." Cassandra nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. "You can't be serious. I've never even met the man." "He's a good man, Cassandra. Hard-working. Honest. His ranch is prosperous. You'd want for nothing. Except love," she said bitterly. "Except choice." The sheriff sighed. "These are hard times. Sometimes we must make hard choices." "Why me? Surely there are women who would willingly marry a prosperous rancher." "Vance is particular. He wants someone educated, someone with good breeding. Your father spoke often of your schooling in Denver." Cassandra rose from her chair and walked to the window. The land stretched out before her, the land her father had loved, had died trying to protect. Land that would be taken from her in a matter of weeks. "And if I refuse? Then you'll lose the farm. And with jobs being scarce for women." The sheriff let the implications hang in the air. Cassandra closed her eyes. The thought of marriage to a stranger repulsed her. But the thought of destitution, of dishonoring her father's memory by losing everything he built, was worse. "I would need to meet him first," she said finally, turning back to face the sheriff. Relief flooded the older man's face. "Of course. He's in town today. I told him I'd bring you to the hotel if you were amenable." An hour later, Cassandra found herself sitting in the dining room of Silverwood's only hotel, across from Matthew Vance. He wasn't what she'd expected. Tall and lean rather than burly, with dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin. He might have been 30, perhaps a few years more. "Miss Baxter," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me." "I haven't agreed to anything yet, Mr. Vance," she replied coolly. A slight smile touched his lips. Direct. "I admire that in a person. Then you'll admire my next question. Why are you proposing marriage to a woman you've never met?" He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "I need a wife. My ranch is growing. I have ambitions beyond merely raising cattle. I need someone who can help manage a household, someone educated who can keep accounts, who would be respected in society. And local girls won't do. The local girls, as you put it, are looking for romance. I'm offering something more practical. A business arrangement," Cassandra said flatly. "Precisely. I'll pay off your father's debts. You'll have security, comfort. I'm not an unreasonable man, Miss Baxter. I don't expect. That is, our arrangement would be respectful. Cassandra studied him. There was nothing overtly threatening about Matthew Vance. He seemed sincere in his proposal, and yet, the idea of tying herself to him for life made her stomach clench. What about children? She asked. A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face. I would like children eventually, but that would be your choice as well. As I said, I'm not unreasonable. Cassandra took a deep breath. I need time to consider. Of course, but the bank won't wait forever. 3 days, she said firmly. I'll give you my answer in 3 days. Vance nodded. 3 days it is. For 3 days, Cassandra wrestled with her decision. She visited her father's grave, seeking guidance that didn't come. She walked the boundaries of the farm, remembering her childhood, the hopes and dreams that had taken root in this soil. And she thought of the future as Matthew Vance's wife, mistress of a prosperous ranch, never wondering where her next meal would come from. A marriage of convenience. A business arrangement. Could she live with that? On the 3rd day, she rode into town and found Matthew Vance at the hotel as arranged. I've made my decision, she said without preamble. Vance gestured to the chair opposite him. Please sit. She remained standing. I'll marry you, Mr. Vance. But I want everything in writing. The payment of my father's debts. My rights in the household. Everything. Instead of being offended, Vance looked impressed. I've already drawn up papers with my lawyer. You're welcome to review them with anyone you trust. Cassandra finally sat. There's one more thing. I want to be clear about the nature of this marriage. This is a practical arrangement for both of us. I'm not promising anything beyond what's necessary. Matthew studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and determined. You agreed to a marriage of duty, Miss Baxter. And I respect that. But I promise you this, I'll make it a marriage of love. Cassandra's heart skipped a beat despite herself. There was something in his tone, something in the intensity of his gaze that made her believe, just for a moment, that perhaps this wasn't merely a business transaction after all. But she couldn't afford such thoughts. Not now. We shall see, Mr. Vance, she said, extending her hand to seal their agreement. We shall see. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Silverwood. Cassandra wore her mother's wedding dress, hastily altered to fit her taller frame. The ceremony was brief, attended only by Sheriff Wilson as witness and the elderly preacher who had buried her father just weeks before. There was no wedding feast, no celebration. Just a quiet drive to the Big V Ranch in Matthew's wagon, her few possessions loaded in the back. As they crested the final hill, Cassandra caught her first glimpse of her new home. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on green pastures. It's beautiful, she admitted. Matthew's expression softened with pride. My father started with nothing, built this place from the ground up. I've added to it over the years. How long have you been running it alone? 5 years. Since my father passed. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, meaning it. As I am for yours. His hands tightened on the reins. I know this isn't what you wanted, Cassandra, but I hope in time you'll be happy here. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. As they pulled up to the house, a slender woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled into a neat bun and a kind face. That's Mrs. Peterson, Matthew explained. She comes in to cook and clean a few days a week. She stayed on to help you get settled. The woman hurried down the steps as Matthew helped Cassandra from the wagon. Welcome, Mrs. Vance, Mrs. Peterson said warmly. I've prepared the house for you. Cassandra forced a smile, the new name still foreign to her ears. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. Let me show you around, Matthew said, offering his arm. The house was well built and surprisingly comfortable. The front parlor was furnished with a mix of practical pieces and a few touches of luxury: an upholstered sofa, curtains of good quality, a small bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. You have books, Cassandra couldn't help saying, drawn immediately to the shelf. Not many, I'm afraid. Mostly practical matters: animal husbandry, botany, some history. My father believed in education, limited though his own was. She ran her fingers along the spines. These are wonderful. Matthew's expression brightened at her enthusiasm. They're yours to enjoy. All of this is yours now. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove that Mrs. Peterson assured her was the finest in the county. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom featured a large 4-poster bed that made Cassandra's cheeks warm when she looked at it. As if reading her thoughts, Matthew cleared his throat. I've had the small room at the end of the hall prepared for myself. You'll have privacy here. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. Thank you. That night, after a simple dinner prepared by Mrs. Peterson, Cassandra sat alone in her new bedroom, running a brush through her long brown hair. The events of the day felt surreal. This morning she had been Cassandra Baxter, destitute and desperate. Tonight she was Cassandra Vance, wife of a prosperous rancher, mistress of a fine home. And yet she had never felt more alone. A knock at her door startled her. Yes. It's Matthew. May I speak with you a moment? She hastily pulled on a robe over her nightgown. Come in. He entered, still fully dressed though he'd removed his boots. In his hands, he held a small wooden box. I wanted to give you this, he said, extending the box toward her. Consider it a wedding gift. Cassandra took it hesitantly. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate silver locket. It's beautiful, she breathed. It was my mother's. She would have wanted you to have it. Cassandra looked up at him, touched by the gesture. Thank you. I'll treasure it. Matthew nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. I've also had the papers delivered to the bank. Your father's debts are settled. The farm remains in your name. What? She stared at him in shock. But I thought that I would take ownership. No, it was your father's legacy to you. It should remain yours. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Matthew's expression was serious. Because I want our marriage to be based on choice, not necessity. You've fulfilled your part of our agreement by becoming my wife. The farm is yours regardless of what happens between us. Cassandra was speechless. It was perhaps the most generous thing anyone had ever done for her. Thank you, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Matthew moved toward the door. Get some rest, Cassandra. Tomorrow will be a busy day. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Cassandra learned the rhythms of the ranch when the men came in for meals, which days were for washing, how to manage the household accounts that Matthew had previously neglected. He was gone from dawn until dusk most days, returning tired but always taking time to ask about her day, to explain anything she needed to know about the ranch operations. They settled into a cordial routine, taking meals together, occasionally reading in the parlor in the evenings. He was unfailingly polite, respectful of her space, never pressuring her for anything beyond what she was willing to give, which was, thus far, very little. They lived as polite strangers sharing a house, the promise of making it a marriage of love seemingly forgotten. Until the night of the storm. It came rolling in from the mountains with little warning, a violent spring thunderstorm that shook the house with its fury. Cassandra had never been fond of storms, and this one was particularly ferocious, with lightning that lit up her bedroom like midday and thunder that rattled the windows in their frames. She was sitting up in bed, a blanket pulled around her shoulders, when her door burst open without warning. Cassandra. Matthew stood there, hair tousled from sleep, wearing only trousers hastily pulled on. Are you all right? I heard a noise. Just the storm, she said, embarrassed to be caught in her fear. It startled me, that's all. Matthew hesitated in the doorway, clearly torn between propriety and concern. Another crack of thunder made her jump, and that decided him. He crossed to her bed and sat on the edge. My sister was afraid of storms, he said quietly. She used to say the thunder was God moving furniture in heaven. Despite her anxiety, Cassandra smiled. That's a charming way to think of it. She was a charming girl. There was a sadness in his voice that made Cassandra look at him more closely. She died when she was 16. Influenza. I'm sorry, Cassandra said, reaching out impulsively to touch his hand. Were you close? Very. She was the only sister among 5 brothers. Our mother died bringing her into the world, so Hannah was raised by men. But she was the gentlest soul. His hand turned beneath hers, his fingers curling around her own. You remind me of her sometimes. That same quiet strength. The intimacy of the moment, of sitting in her bedroom holding hands with her husband of 3 weeks while a storm raged outside, was not lost on Cassandra. Nor was the fact that Matthew was half-dressed, his broad chest bare in the flickering lamplight. Another lightning flash illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Cassandra gasped, instinctively clutching Matthew's hand tighter. "It's all right," he soothed. "The house has weathered worse." "I know it's foolish," she admitted. A grown woman afraid of a little thunder. "Not foolish at all," he said. "We all have our fears. Even you." He smiled slightly. "Even me." "What are you afraid of, Matthew Vance?" His eyes met hers, suddenly serious. "Losing what matters most." The air between them seemed to thicken. For a wild moment, Cassandra thought he might kiss her. Part of her, a larger part than she cared to admit, wanted him to. But Matthew released her hand and stood. "The storm's moving off. You should get some sleep." He was gone before she could say anything else, leaving her to wonder what had just happened and what might have happened if he had stayed. The next morning, there was a new awkwardness between them, as if the brief intimacy of the night before had disturbed the careful balance they had established. Matthew left early for the range, mentioning that he might not return until after dark due to damage from the storm that needed assessing. Cassandra busied herself with household tasks, trying not to dwell on the memory of Matthew's hand in hers, the intensity in his blue eyes when he'd spoken of fear. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard a rider approaching. It wasn't Matthew. The man who dismounted was a stranger to her, though something in his bearing marked him as a cowboy. He was younger than Matthew, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and a confident swagger. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "You must be Mrs. Vance." "I am," she replied cautiously. "And you are?" "Lucas Reed, madam. I work for your husband. Or I did, until recently." "Oh, are you no longer employed at the Big V?" The young man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's what I need to discuss with Mr. Vance." "Is he around?" "I'm afraid not. He's checking the North Range after the storm. He won't be back until evening." Reed's expression hardened slightly. "That's mighty inconvenient. I've ridden a fair distance." "You're welcome to wait in the bunkhouse," Cassandra offered. "Or I can give him a message." "The message needs delivering in person, madam." Reed glanced toward the house. "Mind if I water my horse while I decide what to do?" "Of course. The trough is by the barn." Cassandra watched as Reed led his horse away, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. There was something off about the man, something in his manner that set her on edge. She returned to her laundry, keeping an eye on Reed as he tended to his horse. When he finished, instead of heading for the bunkhouse as she'd suggested, he sauntered toward her. "That's a mighty fine spread your husband has here," he remarked, too close for comfort. "You must be real proud to be Mrs. Vance." "I am," she said evenly, continuing her work. "Funny thing is, last I heard, Vance wasn't the marrying kind. Then all of a sudden, he's got himself a pretty wife." Reed's smile turned ugly. "Makes a man wonder what changed his mind." Cassandra straightened, abandoning all pretense of work. "Mr. Reed, I think it would be best if you waited for my husband in the bunkhouse." "Now, don't be like that, Mrs. Vance. I'm just making conversation." Reed stepped closer, blocking her path to the house. "Trying to figure out what makes a high-class lady like yourself marry a man like Vance." "My marriage is none of your concern," Cassandra said firmly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please step aside." Reed's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Maybe I should find out what Vance sees in you." "Take your hand off my wife." The voice was low, dangerous. Matthew stood a few yards away, rifle in hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Reed released Cassandra instantly, stepping back with his hands raised. "Vance, just the man I wanted to see." "Get off my property, Reed," Matthew said, his rifle not wavering. Now hold on. I came to talk business. About the money you owe me." "I don't owe you anything. You were paid in full when I let you leave with your life after what you did." Reed's face darkened. "That wasn't our agreement. Our agreement was void the moment you stole from me." Matthew's voice was ice. "You've got 10 seconds to mount up and ride out, or I start shooting." Reed glanced between Matthew's rifle and Cassandra, clearly calculating his options. Whatever he saw in Matthew's expression must have convinced him, because he backed toward his horse. "This isn't over, Vance." 9 seconds. Reed scrambled onto his horse, casting one final venomous look at them before galloping away. The moment he was out of sight, Matthew lowered his rifle and hurried to Cassandra's side. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was still racing. Who was that man? Matthew's expression was grim. "Someone I should have dealt with more permanently when I had the chance. Let's get inside. I need to send a rider to town for the sheriff." Once in the house, Matthew insisted on examining her wrist where Reed had grabbed her. His touch was gentle as he turned her arm, looking for bruises. "I'm truly fine," she repeated, "though I admit he frightened me." Matthew's jaw clenched. "I'm sorry you had to face that. Reed worked for me briefly last year. I caught him stealing from the payroll and fired him. He's been trouble ever since, making threats, demanding money he claims I owe him. Is he dangerous?" "He is now." Matthew's eyes met hers. "I shouldn't have left you alone. You couldn't have known he would come here." Cassandra hesitated. "Why did you come back early? You said you'd be gone until evening." A faint smile touched his lips. "I couldn't stop thinking about you. After last night, I wanted to make sure you were all right." The admission sent a flutter through her chest. "I'm glad you did." That evening, after sending one of the ranch hands to alert the sheriff about Reed, Matthew insisted that Cassandra join him in checking that all the doors and windows were securely locked. "Do you really think he'll come back?" she asked as they finished their inspection. "I don't know," Matthew admitted. "Reed's not the smartest man, but he's vindictive. And now he has a new grudge." "Because of me?" Matthew stopped, turning to face her in the hallway. "None of this is your fault, Cassandra. Reed is my problem, from before you came here. But he threatened me to get to you." "Because I'm your wife." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes. "Yes, because you're my wife." He reached out, hesitantly brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I promised to protect you when we married. I intend to keep that promise." The tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. "Matthew." Whatever she might have said was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Matthew immediately tensed, reaching for the pistol at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the door. Cassandra ignored the command, following a few steps behind. "Who is it?" she called. "Sheriff Wilson, Mrs. Vance." Matthew relaxed slightly, holstering his weapon before opening the door to admit the sheriff. "Evening, Matthew." "Mrs. Vance." The sheriff nodded to them both. "Got your message about Reed. Thought I'd ride out myself rather than send a deputy." "We appreciate that," Matthew said, gesturing for the sheriff to enter. "Coffee?" "Wouldn't say no." Over coffee in the kitchen, Matthew recounted the incident with Reed. Sheriff Wilson listened gravely, occasionally asking questions. "I'll keep an eye out for him," the sheriff promised when Matthew finished. "But truthfully, there's not much I can do unless he actually commits a crime. Threatening words aren't enough to hold him." "I understand," Matthew said, though his expression showed his frustration. "In the meantime, I'd advise you to stay alert. Mrs. Vance shouldn't be alone out here while Reed's at large. I've already spoken to the men. Someone will be within shouting distance of the house at all times." After the sheriff left, promising to return the next day to take a full statement, Matthew and Cassandra found themselves alone again in the kitchen. "Perhaps I should sleep downstairs tonight," Matthew suggested, "in case Reed decides to try something." Cassandra hesitated, then made a decision. "Or you could stay in my room. The chair by the window is comfortable enough." Matthew's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Cassandra, I didn't mean to impose. It's not an imposition. It's practical. You'd hear anyone approaching from my window, and I'd feel safer knowing you were there." It wasn't just about safety. The events of the day had shaken her, yes, but they had also made her realize something. In just a few weeks, Matthew Vance had become important to her. The thought of him in danger because of her made her heart ache. Matthew studied her face for a long moment. "If you're sure." "I am." That night, with Matthew dozing in the chair by her window, his rifle propped against the wall, Cassandra found herself thinking about their unusual marriage. About the promise he'd made on the day she'd agreed to marry him. "I'll make it a marriage of love," he had said. At the time, she'd dismissed it as empty words. Now she wasn't so sure. There was something growing between them, something that went beyond the practicality of their arrangement. The question was whether she was brave enough to nurture it. Reed didn't return that night, nor in the days that followed. Life on the ranch gradually returned to normal, though with added precautions. Matthew no longer left Cassandra alone for long periods, and he made sure one of his most trusted hands was always nearby when he had to be away. The increased proximity brought changes to their relationship. Conversations that once had been polite and superficial grew deeper. She learned about his childhood, his dreams for the ranch, his grief over losing his sister and father. He listened with genuine interest to her stories of growing up on the farm, her brief time at school in Denver, her love of books and learning. A month after the incident with Reed, Cassandra woke to the sound of activity in the yard. Peering out her window, she saw Matthew directing several ranch hands who were loading a wagon with supplies. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs, finding Matthew in the kitchen reviewing a list with Mrs. Peterson. "What's happening?" she asked. Matthew looked up with a smile that warmed her more than it should have. "Good morning. I'm sorry if the noise woke you." "It's fine. Are you going somewhere?" "We are," he corrected. "If you're willing. There's a cattle auction in Denver. I thought we might make a trip of it. Stay a few days, maybe taking a show at the theater." Cassandra blinked in surprise. "Denver? But that's 3 days' journey." "2, if the weather holds, and we take the stage most of the way." Matthew hesitated. "I thought you might enjoy a change of scenery. And there's a bookshop in Denver I think you'd like." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "I'd love to go." His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Good. We'll leave as soon as you're ready." The journey to Denver was long, but not unpleasant. They took the stagecoach from Silverwood, which was faster than traveling by wagon, though considerably less comfortable. Cassandra found herself pressed against Matthew's side for much of the journey, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. By the time they reached Denver, she was sore and tired but exhilarated. The city had grown considerably since her school days, with new buildings and businesses springing up along streets that teemed with activity. Matthew had booked rooms for them at the Windsor Hotel, the finest establishment in the city. When Cassandra expressed concern about the expense, he merely smiled. "We can afford it," he assured her. "Besides, this is a special occasion." "What occasion is that?" she asked, curious. His expression softened. "Our first trip together. I want it to be memorable." Their rooms were adjacent, connected by a door that Cassandra left unlocked, though Matthew never presumed to enter without knocking. The first evening, they dined in the hotel's elegant restaurant, where Matthew surprised her by ordering champagne. "To new experiences," he toasted, raising his glass to hers. Cassandra took a sip, the bubbles tickling her nose. "I've never had champagne before. Do you like it?" "I think so," she said, taking another sip. "Though I suspect I might like it too much if I'm not careful." Matthew laughed, a rich sound that drew glances from nearby diners. "Then we'll be careful together." The next day was the cattle auction, which Cassandra found surprisingly interesting. Matthew explained the intricacies of breeding stock, the traits he looked for, the bloodlines he was trying to establish on the Big V. "You have a vision for the ranch," she observed as they watched a particularly fine bull being led into the ring. "I do," he admitted. "My father built something good. I want to make it great." He glanced at her. "Not just for myself. For the future." There was something in his tone, something in the way his eyes lingered on her face, that made Cassandra wonder if that future might include more than just the two of them. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After the auction, true to his word, Matthew took her to a bookshop. It was a marvelous place, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with volumes on every conceivable subject. "Choose whatever you like," he told her. "Consider it a gift." Cassandra moved through the shop in a daze of delight, running her fingers along spines, opening volumes to inhale the scent of ink and paper. Eventually, she selected 3 books: a novel by Dickens she had long wanted to read, a book of poetry, and a practical guide to gardening. "Are you sure?" she asked when Matthew insisted on paying for all 3. "They're rather expensive." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "The look on your face when you're reading is worth far more than the cost of a few books." That evening, they attended a production of Romeo and Juliet at the local theater. Cassandra had read the play but never seen it performed. She was completely captivated, tears streaming down her face during the tragic final scene. As they left the theater, Matthew handed her his handkerchief. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you by bringing you to a tragedy." "You didn't," she assured him, dabbing at her eyes. "It was beautiful, even in its sadness. To love so completely, even knowing it might end in heartbreak. There's something magnificent about that kind of devotion." Matthew was quiet as they walked back to the hotel, his expression thoughtful. When they reached her door, he paused. "Cassandra," he said, her name like a caress on his lips. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love and devotion." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When I asked you to marry me, it was a practical arrangement. But I meant what I said that day, about making it a marriage of love." "Matthew, please, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I'm not a man of fancy words, but I want you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to my home, to my life, that I didn't even know was missing." Cassandra swallowed hard, her throat suddenly tight. "And what was that?" "Hope," he said simply. "Hope for a future that's more than just work and duty. A future with joy in it." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "I'm falling in love with you, Cassandra Vance. I don't expect you to feel the same. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wanted you to know." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good night," he whispered, then turned and entered his own room, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart hammering against her ribs and her mind in turmoil. That night, sleep eluded her. Matthew's words echoed in her mind, alongside her own confused feelings. She had married him for security, for duty. She hadn't expected to find herself drawn to him, hadn't expected the flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her, the warmth that spread through her when he was near. Was this love? Or just gratitude for his kindness, for the life he had given her? She didn't know. And the not knowing frightened her almost as much as the possibility that it might indeed be love. The next morning, she half expected awkwardness between them, but Matthew greeted her with the same warm smile as always, making no reference to his declaration of the night before. Their final day in Denver was spent pleasantly, visiting shops and taking a carriage ride through the city's growing neighborhoods. By the time they boarded the stagecoach for the return journey, Cassandra felt both refreshed and strangely unsettled, as if something fundamental had shifted during their time away. The journey home was quieter than the trip out, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When the stage stopped for the night at a small roadhouse, they were given a single room to share due to limited space. "I can sleep on the floor," Matthew offered immediately. Cassandra shook her head. "Don't be ridiculous. The bed is large enough for both of us." At his surprised look, she added, "We're married, after all." It was the first time they had acknowledged the physical aspect of their marriage since their wedding night, when Matthew had quietly taken himself to the spare bedroom without being asked. That night, they lay side by side in the narrow bed, careful not to touch, the inches between them feeling like both an ocean and a whisper. "Matthew," Cassandra said softly into the darkness. "Yes. What you said in Denver. About falling in love with me. Did you mean it?" She felt rather than saw him turn toward her. "I meant every word. But I don't want you to feel pressured, Cassandra. Our arrangement stands as it is. And if I wanted it to be more." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Then, slowly, Matthew's hand found hers beneath the covers. "Then I would be the happiest man alive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Cassandra closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around his. "I don't know if what I feel is love. Not yet. But I want to find out." Matthew's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "That's all I ask. A chance." When they returned to the Big V the following evening, Cassandra felt as if she was seeing it through new eyes. This place that had once felt foreign, a symbol of her desperate choice, now seemed almost like home. The ranch hands greeted Matthew with news and questions, while Mrs. Peterson welcomed Cassandra with a freshly baked pie and eager inquiries about their trip to the city. It wasn't until after dinner, when they were alone in the parlor, that Matthew brought up a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking about Reed," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Cassandra tensed. In the excitement of their trip, she had almost forgotten about the threat. "Has there been word of him?" "No, and that's what worries me. He's not the type to let go of a grudge easily." Matthew leaned forward in his chair. "I've been considering hiring a Pinkerton agent to find him." "Isn't that expensive?" "Yes, but your safety is worth more than money." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know about Reed. Something I didn't tell you before." Cassandra set aside her book. "What is it?" "When I caught him stealing, there was a confrontation. He pulled a knife. I defended myself, and in the struggle, he was injured. Badly. Matthew's expression was grim. He nearly lost his arm. The doctor in town saved it, but he's never regained full use of it. That's why he hates you so much, Cassandra realized. Yes, and why I fear he won't stop until he feels he's had his revenge. The implications hung heavily between them. What can we do? I've spoken to some of the men. We're increasing patrols around the property. No one rides alone, and I want you to start carrying this. Matthew reached into his pocket and pulled out a small Derringer pistol. Cassandra stared at the weapon. Matthew, I've never fired a gun. Then I'll teach you. His eyes held hers. I won't always be by your side, Cassandra, much as I might wish it. I need to know you can protect yourself if necessary. The seriousness of his tone convinced her. All right, you'll teach me. The next day, Matthew took her to a secluded spot behind the barn and set up several bottles on a fence post. The Derringer only has 2 shots, he explained, showing her how to load the tiny pistol. So they have to count. Cassandra listened carefully as he explained how to aim, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger, how to brace for the recoil despite the weapon's small size. Her first shot went wide, the noise making her flinch despite the warning. The second was closer but still missed the target. Again, Matthew said, reloading for her. They practiced for an hour, until Cassandra's arms ached and her ears rang. By the end, she was hitting the target more often than not. You're a quick learner, Matthew praised, taking the pistol from her to clean it. Let's hope I never need to use it for real, she said soberly. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a rider approached from the direction of town. Cassandra felt Matthew tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip where his pistol rested. But it was only Jeb, one of the younger ranch hands who had been sent to town for supplies. Evening, boss. Mrs. Vance, Jeb called as he dismounted. Got a telegram for you from the sheriff. Matthew took the folded paper, reading it quickly. His expression darkened. What is it? Cassandra asked, anxiety curling in her stomach. Reed was seen in Pueblo 3 days ago, Matthew said, his voice tight. He was asking questions about the Big V, about our routine. He's coming here, Cassandra said, the reality of the threat suddenly much more immediate. It seems likely. Matthew turned to Jeb. Ride out and gather the men. I want everyone back at the ranch by nightfall. As Jeb hurried to comply, Matthew led Cassandra inside, locking the door behind them. What are we going to do? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Prepare, Matthew said grimly. And wait. The next 2 days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. The ranch hands took turns patrolling the property, while Matthew rarely let Cassandra out of his sight. They slept in the same room now, Matthew in a chair by the door, his rifle across his lap. On the 3rd night, Cassandra woke to the sound of Matthew moving in the darkness. What is it? She whispered, sitting up. I heard something outside, he murmured. Stay here. Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping through the bedroom door with his rifle in hand. Cassandra reached for the Derringer she now kept in her bedside drawer, her heart pounding against her ribs. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. She strained to hear any sound from downstairs, any indication of what was happening. Then came the unmistakable crack of a gunshot, followed by a shout. Fear propelled her from the bed. Despite Matthew's instruction to stay put, she couldn't remain safely upstairs while he might be in danger. Clutching the Derringer, she crept to the hallway, peering down the darkened staircase. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow crossing the foyer below. Then another gunshot, the flash momentarily illuminating the scene. She saw Matthew crouched behind the parlor doorway, exchanging fire with someone near the kitchen. Matthew, she called, fear making her voice sharp. Cassandra, stay back, he shouted, just as another figure lunged from the shadows. It was Reed, his face contorted with hate, a knife gleaming in his hand. Matthew turned too late, the knife slashing across his arm as he tried to bring his rifle to bear. Without thinking, Cassandra raised the Derringer and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to distract Reed, giving Matthew the opportunity to drive his fist into the man's face. The 2 men grappled in the foyer, Reed's knife flashing in the dim light from the single lamp that burned in the parlor. Cassandra hurried down the stairs, searching desperately for a way to help. Reed had Matthew pinned against the wall, the knife inching toward his throat despite Matthew's grip on his wrist. With her second and final bullet spent, Cassandra did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the side table and brought it down on Reed's head with all her strength. The blow wasn't enough to knock him unconscious, but it staggered him, allowing Matthew to break his grip and deliver a punch that sent Reed crashing to the floor. Before Reed could recover, Matthew had his pistol trained on him. "Don't move," he ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the blood streaming from the cut on his arm. Reed glared up at them, hatred burning in his eyes. "Should have killed me when you had the chance, Vance." "I'm considering it now," Matthew said coldly. At that moment, the front door burst open, and two of the ranch hands rushed in, drawn by the gunfire. "Boss, you all right?" the older of the two asked, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "We're fine," Matthew said, not taking his eyes off Reed. "Tie him up. We'll take him to the sheriff in the morning." As the men secured Reed, Cassandra hurried to Matthew's side, examining the wound on his arm. "You need stitches." "It can wait," he began, but the look she gave him silenced any further protest. While the ranch hands dragged Reed to the barn for safekeeping, Cassandra led Matthew to the kitchen and began cleaning his wound by the light of the lamp she hastily lit. "That was incredibly brave," Matthew said as she worked, his voice soft with admiration. "And incredibly foolish. He could have killed you." "He was going to kill you," Cassandra replied, her hands steady despite the residual fear coursing through her. "I couldn't let that happen." "Why not?" The question was gentle, probing. Cassandra's hands stilled. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Because I love you." The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between them, momentous and yet as natural as breathing. Matthew's expression softened, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you, Matthew Vance," she repeated, the truth of it settling into her bones, into the very core of her being. "I think I have for some time now. I was just too afraid to admit it." "Afraid of what?" "Of letting go of the past. Of embracing a future I never planned for." She smiled slightly. "Of falling in love with the man I married out of duty." Matthew leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "I have loved you since the moment you stood in Sheriff Wilson's office and looked me in the eye, telling me you wouldn't be pushed into anything you didn't choose. You had fire in you then. You still do." "I chose this," Cassandra said softly. "I choose you." Their first true kiss was tender, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Your arm," Cassandra remembered, looking down at the half-dressed wound. Matthew laughed, the sound rich with joy. "It can wait a moment longer." In the morning, they delivered Reed to Sheriff Wilson, who was all too happy to lock up the troublemaker on charges of attempted murder and breaking and entering. "He'll be going away for a long time," the sheriff assured them. "Colorado doesn't take kindly to men who try to murder honest ranchers in their beds." As they rode back to the Big V, side by side on their horses, Cassandra felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing her smile. "About how strangely life works out," she replied. "If my father hadn't died, if the bank hadn't foreclosed, if you hadn't made your proposition, we might never have found each other." "I'd like to think we would have," Matthew said thoughtfully. "Some things are meant to be, no matter the path that leads to them." "Do you really believe that?" "I do." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I believe you were meant to be Cassandra Vance, just as I was meant to love you." The Big V thrived in the years that followed. Under Matthew and Cassandra's joint management, the ranch expanded, adding new breeding stock and additional acreage. The house grew as well, with a new wing added to accommodate the children that eventually blessed their union, first a daughter named Hannah after Matthew's sister, then twin boys who had their father's blue eyes and their mother's determined spirit. Cassandra never forgot the circumstances that had brought them together, the marriage of convenience that had transformed into something profound and lasting. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would take out the locket Matthew had given her on their first night as husband and wife, now containing miniature portraits of their children. "Any regrets?" Matthew asked her on their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the home they had built together, watching their children play in the yard. Cassandra leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with all her heart. She had agreed to a marriage of duty all those years ago, and true to his word, Matthew had made it a marriage of love. A love that had only grown stronger with each passing day, each shared joy and sorrow, each challenge faced and overcome together. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself as a young woman with dreams of adventure and independence. It was better, richer, fuller in ways she could never have imagined. As the sun set over the land that had become truly theirs not just in deed, but in shared labor and love, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that some agreements were meant to be broken, and some promises were meant to be kept for a lifetime. And in the end, duty and love were not so different after all. Both required commitment, sacrifice, and faith. The difference was in the heart behind the actions, in the joy that came from giving freely rather than from obligation. "I love you, Cassandra Vance," Matthew whispered, echoing her thoughts as he often did. "More today than yesterday. Less than tomorrow." She turned her face to his, the familiar contours of his features more dear to her with each passing year. "And I love you. Always." In the distance, their eldest child called for them, eager to show off a new trick learned on the pony Matthew had given her for her birthday. Hand in hand, they rose to answer the summons, moving forward together into the life they had created, a life built on a foundation of duty, strengthened by love, and enriched by the family they had become. It was more than either had dared to hope for on that day in the Silverwood Hotel dining room. More than a practical arrangement, more than a business transaction. It was a marriage of love, in every sense of the word. And that made all the difference.